The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning, right as I was locking up my truck outside battalion headquarters. One word lit up the screen. Mom. For half a second, I almost let it go to voicemail. She never called this late. Not once in 46 years had she called me after midnight, unless the world had already started falling apart. I answered on the second ring, and before she even said hello, I heard it, that quiet, broken kind of crying. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes from someone who gave up trying to sound okay a long time ago. Kate, her voice cracked around my name. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Mom, what happened? Silence stretched long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, finally, she spoke. Your father called you a disgrace again. I put a hand against the cold metal of my truck just to stay upright. What did he do this time? He told the whole table having a daughter in the Army embarrassed him. Her breath hitched. Then he said if I wanted to defend you so badly, I could pack a bag and leave his house. Another pause, longer this time. So I did. For a few seconds I couldn't hear anything except the low hum of the generators running behind me. Fort Bragg never really sleeps. Somewhere off in the dark, soldiers were staging vehicles for a 500 movement, and a Black Hawk cut low across the sky, its rotor wash rattling a nearby fence line. On any other night, those sounds would have steadied me. Tonight they just faded into the background, drowned out by the sound of my mother trying to breathe evenly on the other end of the line. Where are you? I asked. A motel off the highway near downtown. It's fine, really, I just. Are you safe? I think so. I'm coming. Kate, it's the middle of the night, you don't have to. I said I'm coming, Mom. I hung up before she could argue any further because I already knew how that argument would end. She'd tell me not to worry about her. She'd tell me to go back to sleep. She'd tell me, the way she'd told me my whole life, that everything would look better in the morning. It never did, not with him. My name is Kate Reynolds. I'm 46 years old, and I've worn this uniform for almost 24 years. I've led soldiers through 2 overseas deployments, through hurricane relief, through nights so bad they never made it onto the evening news. People assume that kind of experience makes a person unshakable. It doesn't. Nothing prepares you for the sound of your own mother sounding defeated. I climbed into my truck and pulled onto the interstate, tires humming against wet asphalt. This time of night, the highway belonged to truckers and ghosts. Gas station lights glowed like lonely islands in the dark, and every mile marker I passed dragged another memory up from somewhere I usually kept it buried. Your father called you a disgrace. It wasn't new, it had never been new. My father, Gerald Whitmore, had spent 40 years building Whitmore Construction Group into one of the largest commercial developers in the state. Business magazines loved him. Church bulletins thanked him for his generosity. City council members shook his hand for the cameras. Everyone in town believed they knew Gerald Whitmore, the self-made man, the philanthropist, the pillar of the community. They didn't know the man who lived in my house. Growing up, I believed every daughter wanted exactly one thing from her father, to hear him say he was proud of her. I never got to hear it, not once. When I earned my appointment to West Point, he told our extended family I was throwing away a perfectly good future. When I graduated 4 years later, he didn't show up. He said he had a closing on a property that couldn't wait. My mother sat alone in a stadium of proud families, waving both arms so hard I could pick her out from 100 yards away, blinking back tears the whole time. When I got my commission, he mailed me a card. Inside, in his tight, deliberate handwriting, were 4 words: "You could do better." That card sat in a shoebox in my closet for years, not because I treasured it, but because throwing it away felt like giving him one more thing to be right about. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything different from him. It was easier that way. Safer. The miles kept sliding by, and so did the memories. Birthdays he skipped for important calls. Promotions he never mentioned to a single relative. He told the neighbors I worked for the government, never that I served my country. My mother was the only one who ever corrected him, and every time she paid for it later, behind closed doors, in ways I only ever saw the aftermath of. The motel sat off a service road, 2 stories, half its vacancy sign burned out. I spotted her silver sedan parked crooked near the stairwell and was out of my truck before I'd even put it in park. She opened the door before I knocked. One look at her and my chest tightened. Her hair was unbrushed, her cardigan was wrinkled like she'd slept in it, though it was clear she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were swollen and red. But what stopped me cold was the suitcase sitting upright by the bed, not a bag for one restless night, but a suitcase packed like someone leaving for good. I wrapped my arms around her, and neither of us said anything for almost a full minute. Finally, she pulled back just enough to manage a small, tired smile. "I knew you'd come." "I'll always come, Mom." She nodded and busied her hands making 2 cups of instant coffee with the tiny motel machine. It tasted like burnt cardboard. Neither of us cared. "Tell me what happened," I said, sitting across from her on the edge of the bed. She wrapped both hands around her paper cup like it was the only warm thing left in the world. He hosted another one of his investor dinners tonight. I already knew where this was going. Those dinners were legendary in our family. Lawyers, city officials, contractors, everyone competing to be the most impressive person at the table. "Someone asked if you'd be at the company's 40th anniversary next month," she continued. I didn't need to guess the answer. I wasn't invited. She shook her head slowly. He laughed, right there in front of everyone. He said he didn't need, and I'm quoting him exactly, military charity work decorating his company's anniversary. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. Let her get it out. "I told him you devoted your entire adult life to serving other people." Her voice wavered. He stood up, in front of the whole table, and he said, she stopped, gathering herself. He said a woman playing soldier doesn't impress anyone, and that you'd always be the biggest disappointment this family ever produced. The room went quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge. I didn't know which part hurt worse, the insult itself, or picturing my mother standing there, humiliated in front of a room full of people who valued my father's approval more than their own decency. Somewhere around 4:30 in the morning, after we'd both gone quiet for a long while, she spoke again, softer this time. "Kate." "Yes." "There's something else, something I haven't told you." I looked up. "I don't think he's doing this because he hates your career." She leaned in, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "I think he's scared." "Scared of what?" She hesitated. About 3 weeks ago, I walked into his home office without knocking. He slammed his laptop shut so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. Her eyes searched mine. He's never cared before if I walked in on him working. Never, but that night he looked terrified. Later I heard him on the phone in the garage, arguing with someone. I only caught one sentence clearly. "What did he say?" If Kate ever starts asking questions, everything falls apart. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Questions about what? "I don't know," she said before I could even ask. Then she reached into her purse. "But I found this in our mailbox yesterday. No return address, just my name written by hand." She handed me a small manila envelope. Inside was a single brass key, the kind that opens a storage unit, along with a folded note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Your father-in-law wanted Kate to have this when the time was right. Trust no one." I read it twice. My grandfather had been dead for 12 years. I looked up at my mother. "Did Dad know about this?" "No," she said. "I don't think anyone did." Outside the motel window, the sky over the city had started to lighten from black to gray. I slipped the key into my jacket pocket, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't thinking about how to earn my father's approval. I was thinking about what he'd spent his entire life trying to hide. I decided right then that in the morning, I wasn't going to call him and demand an apology. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to walk into the Whitmore construction boardroom in my dress uniform, and this time, I wasn't walking in as anyone's daughter. By 8:15 the next morning, I was parked outside the glass tower on the west end of downtown that housed Whitmore Construction Group's headquarters. 20 stories of mirrored windows, throwing back the morning sun like the building had nothing at all to hide. I sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. My uniform felt heavier than usual, not from the medals pinned to my chest, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't here to repair a relationship. I was here because my mother had spent the night in a motel with a packed suitcase, and there comes a point where loyalty stops being a virtue and starts being permission for someone to keep hurting the people you love. I'd reached that point. A security guard held the door open before I'd even crossed the lot. "Morning, Colonel." I nodded a greeting, and I watched the moment his eyes drifted from my rank to the name tape. Over my pocket, his expression shifted. "Mr. Whitmore's upstairs," he said, then added quietly, "Good luck." That surprised me. I'd expected cold stares from people loyal to my father. Instead, I noticed something else in the lobby, an undercurrent of nervousness that seemed to run through everyone I passed. The marble floors hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Neither had the fountain or the wall of framed photos showing landmark developments my father claimed had transformed the region. His own portrait hung behind the reception desk, confident, generous, smiling. The version of Gerald Whitmore the public adored. The young receptionist froze when she recognized me. Can I help you?" "I'm here to see my father." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She reached for the phone, but before she could dial, a familiar voice rang out across the lobby. "Kate." I turned. Carol Jennings, my father's executive assistant of nearly 25 years. She used to sneak me cookies when my mother brought me by the office after school. Her hair had gone fully silver since I'd last seen her, but her smile was the same, right up until it faltered. "I heard about your mother," she said quietly. "I'm taking care of her." Carol glanced toward the elevator bank, lowering her voice. "He's not in a good mood." "When is he ever?" A small, tired smile escaped her. "For what it's worth," she said, "a lot of people around here stopped believing in him years ago." That sentence stayed lodged in my chest all the way up to the top floor. I caught my own reflection in the polished elevator doors, dress uniform, colonel's insignia, rows of ribbons representing 24 years of service. For most of my life, I had wished my father would look at those things and finally feel something close to pride. This morning, I realized I honestly didn't care anymore. The doors opened onto laughter and the clink of coffee cups, someone telling a story about a golf outing. I walked straight toward the conference room without slowing down. The assistant stationed outside looked startled. "Ma'am, you can't just..." I smiled and opened the door anyway. I know exactly where it is. Conversation died instantly. Nearly 20 executives turned toward the doorway. Some recognized me, others just saw the uniform. At the head of the table sat my father, gray suit, crimson tie, gold watch, the exact same expression of mild annoyance I'd known my whole life. He looked up, then laughed loudly enough for the whole room to hear, the way he always did when he wanted everyone else to laugh along with him. No one did. "Well," he said, "look who finally decided to visit, here to ask for a job." "I already have one." "I meant a real one." A couple of uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room, but nobody seemed eager to encourage him further. I stayed standing near the door. "I came because Mom spent last night in a motel." His smile disappeared. "This is not the place." "You made it the place when you humiliated her in front of your entire board." Uneasy glances passed around the table. One older director cleared his throat and started to say something, but my father raised a hand without even looking at him. "I'll handle this." He turned back to me. "Your mother overreacted. I simply expressed my disappointment." "You called me a disgrace." "I told the truth." "So did I said calmly. 24 years in the Army teaches you one very useful thing: the calmest voice in the room usually ends up controlling it. I had no intention of raising mine. "I have one question," I said. He crossed his arms. "Go ahead." "Why are federal auditors scheduled to visit next week?" For exactly 1 second, his face changed. It was small, barely a flicker, but everyone at that table saw it. "What are you talking about? There aren't any auditors." I watched his eyes as he said it. He was lying, and not confidently, desperately. Somewhere down the table, a director slowly took off his glasses. Another reached for a water bottle with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Interesting, they already knew something. The Army Corps of Engineers recently froze several infrastructure contracts tied to this company, I continued. That part's public record, nothing confidential about it. His jaw tightened. Reviews happen all the time in this industry. They do, I agreed. They just don't usually make a CEO's face go white. I'm not panicking. No, I said, glancing around the suddenly silent room. It certainly doesn't look like it. Someone near the far end of the table coughed to cover what was very clearly a laugh. My father's ears turned a deep shade of red. You have no authority in this room. You're right, I don't answer to construction executives. Then why are you here? I reached into my jacket pocket. For one brief, satisfying moment, his eyes went wide with something close to fear. But instead of pulling out documents, I set the storage key down on the ish table, just the key, nothing else. It slid a few inches and stopped, roughly halfway between us. Every ounce of color drained from his face. He stared at that key like it might detonate. He didn't blink, he didn't move. What is that? One of the directors finally asked. Nothing, my father answered far too quickly. I looked directly at him. Really? He reached out and picked it up. His fingers were trembling. In 46 years, I had never once seen my father's hands shake. You should leave, he said quietly. I will, I said, after I tell everyone one thing. Nobody in that room made a sound. If my grandfather left something behind, I said, looking slowly around the table, I intend to find it. My father slammed both palms flat against the table hard enough to make several people flinch. Then, seeming to catch himself, he sank back into his chair, trying and failing to look composed. The room had shifted. Every set of eyes that had once been fixed on me was now locked on him. For the first time in his career, Gerald Whitmore looked afraid. I picked up my cover from under my arm. I'm done here. As I reached the door, a quiet voice called out, Colonel. It was Walt, the building's longtime maintenance supervisor, pushing his cart down the hall. I'd known him since high school. He glanced both directions before speaking. Your grandfather trusted very few people in his life, he said. So I've heard. He pressed a small envelope into my palm so quickly that nobody inside the room even noticed. You're going to want this before you open that storage unit. What is it? He gave me a sad sort of smile. The truth. Then he pushed his cart on down the hallway as if nothing at all had happened. Inside the envelope was a single flash drive, labeled in careful black marker, for Kate only. Whatever my father had spent years trying to hide, I had a feeling that little brass key was about to become the least important thing I'd found that day. I didn't open the flash drive in the parking lot. Part of me still wanted to believe it might hold nothing more dramatic than old family photographs. But the look on my father's face when he saw that storage key told me otherwise. Somewhere between downtown and the interstate, I pulled into a roadside diner, the kind with a chalkboard special sign and a bell over the door. It was mid-morning, the breakfast rush long gone, just a couple of retirees splitting a newspaper and two truckers arguing about college football scores from the weekend. It felt like the safest, most ordinary place on earth, which was exactly what I needed. I ordered black coffee and eggs I barely touched, then pulled my government laptop from my bag and slid the flash drive into the port. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared, Whitmore Family Archive. My pulse picked up as I opened it. Inside were dozens of neatly organized subfolders, board minutes, financial ledgers, personal letters, audio recordings, property deeds, and one folder simply labeled Journal. The earliest file was dated more than 15 years ago. My grandfather had been quietly documenting something for years before he died. I opened the journal first. The first line read, If you're reading this, Kate, it means I waited too long to tell you the truth. I hope I'm wrong. But if Gerald is still running this company, you're going to need proof, not stories. I sat back against the vinyl booth. My grandfather had never been a man for gossip. If he wrote something down, he meant to be able to prove it in a courtroom. According to his journal, Whitmore Construction had started out as something entirely different, a company that built schools, small churches, and affordable housing across the region back in the early 70s. My grandfather believed a company owed something back to the community that supported it. My father believed in something else entirely: growth, prestige, and the kind of profit margins that made investors salivate. The journal described years of quiet arguments between father and son over the company's direction. My grandfather wanted slow, sustainable expansion. My father wanted luxury developments, political connections, and increasingly large loans. Then came a sentence that made me stop breathing for a second. I believe my own son has begun hiding money from the company. I read it 3 times before it fully landed. A waitress refilled my coffee without asking, "You okay, honey?" I hadn't realized how long I'd been staring at the same paragraph. "Yeah, just some family stuff." She nodded knowingly. "Sometimes that's the hardest kind." Then she walked away before I could say anything else. I opened another folder full of scanned contracts and invoices. Most looked completely ordinary: payroll reports, material orders, construction bids. But one name kept resurfacing again and again: a subcontractor called Cumberland Materials Group. I'd never heard of it in my life. And every payment tied to that name was oddly large, sometimes running into the millions. I pulled up the state's public business registry on my phone. No active filing, no listed office, no employees on record, a shell company, or the closest thing to one I'd ever seen with my own eyes. The next folder held audio files. I put in my earbuds, and the first recording opened with my grandfather's voice, warm and familiar even after all these years. "If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone." I swallowed hard. He'd been gone for over a decade. Hearing his voice again knocked the wind out of me more than I expected. "I've spent too long hoping Gerald would remember the values this company was built on." A long sigh crackled through the recording. "He won't. I've copied everything I could safely get my hands on. I couldn't stop him." His voice cracked slightly. "Maybe someday you can." The recording ended. I sat there a long moment, staring out the window at traffic that kept rolling by like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis for me. I made one call before I did anything else, to Colonel Hayes, retired Army JAG, one of the most straightforward attorneys I'd ever known. He picked up on the second ring. "Kate, you never call this early unless something's wrong." I think I've stumbled into something bigger than a family argument. Half an hour later, I was sitting across from him in his small downtown office. No marble, no expensive art, just bookshelves and a coffee maker older than both of us combined. He spent nearly an hour going through the files without saying much of anything. When he finally set down his reading glasses, his expression had gone very serious. "Where did all this come from?" "My grandfather." "Does anyone else know about it?" "I don't think so." He studied me carefully. "Kate, if these documents are authentic, this isn't simple financial misconduct anymore." "Then what is it?" "It could be organized fraud, years of it." The room suddenly felt smaller. "I don't want to destroy him," I admitted quietly. "I know you don't," he said. "That's exactly why you can't be the one running this investigation." "What do you mean?" "Emotion clouds judgment. You need someone completely outside the family." He reached for his phone. "I know a financial crimes investigator with the Bureau, someone thorough, someone fair." "You'd bring in the FBI." "I'd ask them to quietly verify whether these records are real. If they're not, no harm done. If they are," he looked at me directly, "then a lot of innocent people deserve to know the truth." That afternoon, I picked my mother up from the motel. She insisted on paying for her own room. I insisted harder, and eventually she gave in with a tired laugh. We stopped for lunch at a small diner in Clarksville, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, she actually laughed, not because anything was particularly funny, but because for once she felt safe. Halfway through lunch, I finally asked the question that had been eating at me all day. "Mom, did Grandpa know?" She looked up slowly, then nodded. "He suspected." "And you knew he suspected?" "I knew he worried." Why didn't anyone tell me? She stared out the window for a long moment. Because your grandfather hoped your father would change on his own. And you? I hope too, she smiled sadly. I waited 40 years, Kate. I reached across the table and took her hand. She squeezed it back. I should have left years ago, she said quietly. No, I told her. You left when you were finally ready. Her eyes filled again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. That evening, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. This is Special Agent Diane Reyes with the FBI. Colonel Hayes shared some documents with our office. My heart skipped, I understand. We've already compared 2 of the contracts against public filings. They appear genuine. A brief pause. We'd like your permission to examine the rest. Of course. Another pause, longer this time. Colonel, if the remaining files match what we've already verified, your father hasn't been hiding one crime. We may be looking at close to 2 decades of fraud. Outside my mother's soon-to-be apartment, a couple of kids rode bikes across the parking lot in slow, lazy loops. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower droned on. It all looked so perfectly, achingly normal. But I realized then that the 2:47 a.m. phone call had never really been about my mother getting thrown out of her own house. It had been the beginning of the end. 3 days later, life had mostly settled back into its ordinary rhythm, which was the strange thing about uncovering something enormous. The rest of the world kept buying coffee and arguing about football and standing in checkout lines, completely unaware that everything was about to change. Meanwhile, I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept more than 4 hours straight. I still reported to post every morning at 600, Standy. NG information with officers who had no idea my family was quietly coming apart at the seams. By 7:30 I was reviewing logistics reports, doing my best to keep whatever was happening outside the gate from following me through it. Some days I succeeded. Other days, my executive officer, Major Grant, caught me staring at a map without actually seeing it. You've been somewhere else all week, she said one afternoon, closing my office door behind her. I'm fine. I've served with you 6 years, Kate. I know what fine looks like. She crossed her arms. This isn't it. So what does this look like? Like someone carrying a rucksack full of bricks. It was, without question, the most accurate description anyone had given me all week. Later that day, Agent Reyes called again. We've confirmed almost everything. How bad? Worse than we expected. Your grandfather wasn't exaggerating. That shell company received payments tied to at least 14 public construction contracts. In millions. Tens of millions, and that's only what we've confirmed so far. What happens now? We keep building the case. A pause. He doesn't know we're involved, not yet. That evening I drove my mother apartment hunting. She refused to spend another night at the motel. We found a small complex outside town, brick buildings, trimmed hedges, a little pond where 2 kids were feeding ducks. The property manager, a kind older woman named Mrs. Alvarez, looked at my mother gently. Living alone. For now, my mother said. We look out for each other here, Mrs. Alvarez said. My mother smiled, really smiled for the first time all day. I'd like that. Watching her sign a year lease was strangely emotional. She wasn't just renting an apartment. She was choosing herself for the first time in decades. The peace didn't last long. 2 mornings later, my phone exploded with texts. The headlines splashed across the local paper read, Local CEO targeted by disgruntled daughter. Below it sat a photo of me walking into headquarters in uniform, the article twisting every fact just enough to sound plausible. I knew exactly who'd leaked it. My father had spent decades cultivating friendships with reporters and politicians. This was how he fought, not with fists, but with reputation. Colonel Hayes had warned me this might happen. Never argue through the media, he'd said. Facts move slower than rumors, but they last a lot longer. The hardest part wasn't the newspaper, it was church that Sunday. My mother insisted on going, same pew we'd sat in for 30 years. Conversations quieted the moment we walked in. One older man shook my hand and said, praying for your father. Not for my mother, not for me. A woman 2 rows back whispered just loud enough for us to hear, "I always knew success changes people." My mother leaned over and murmured, "I'm not sure which one of us she meant," and I actually laughed, a real one, small but real. Sometimes humor isn't about finding something funny, it's about refusing to let bitterness win. Monday brought another surprise. Walt called, "Found something else. Old records room, look behind that filing cabinet." Together we slid the cabinet a few inches from the wall, revealing a dusty cardboard box full of cassette tapes, each carefully labeled by year. "Why would anyone record board meetings?" I asked. Walt smiled. "Your grandfather believed memories fade. He preferred evidence." Colonel Hayes had the tapes digitized. 2 nights later, we sat and listened together. Most of it was routine, budgets, schedules, insurance renewals. Then we reached a recording from years back. My father's voice filled the small office. "If the inspectors start asking questions, delay them." Another voice answered, "That's risky." My father laughed. "No, getting caught is risky." The room went completely silent. Even all these years later, hearing those words out loud made my stomach turn. "That," Hayes said quietly, pausing the recording, "isn't just unethical." "I know. It's evidence." The investigation accelerated after that. Subpoenas were quietly drafted, and financial analysts pored over thousands of transactions. Still, Agent Reyes cautioned patience. "We only get one shot at this," she reminded me. "Move too early, and he'll destroy whatever we haven't found yet." Waiting felt like its own kind of torture. Every morning my father walked into that building believing he was untouchable, and every morning I reminded myself that patience wasn't weakness. It was discipline. Then, on a Friday afternoon, everything shifted. Carol called, her voice shaking. "The chief financial officer just resigned. He walked into your father's office and said he couldn't lie anymore." Your father threw a paperweight across the room. "Is anyone hurt?" "No, but Kate, he's meeting with federal investigators tonight." I stood at my office window looking out over the parade field, and for the first time since this had all started, I felt the balance finally shift. Not because my father was losing, because people who'd been afraid of him for years were finally starting to tell the truth. That evening, Agent Reyes called once more. Not enough for an arrest yet, but enough for search warrants. A pause. "The annual shareholders' meeting is Monday morning. Word is your father plans to announce a major expansion." I almost laughed at the irony. He still thinks he's winning. He won't think that for much longer. Monday arrived gray and humid. The kind of morning that made a uniform stick to your shoulders before 9 a.m. I parked across from the office tower and sat in my truck a long moment before going in. I wasn't afraid of my father anymore. I was afraid of what the truth might do to everyone still connected to him, the hundreds of honest employees who had nothing to do with any of this, whose paychecks depended on a company they had no idea was built on rot. My phone buzzed, my mother. "You all right?" "I will be. I've been praying all morning." A pause. "One thing before you go in there, no matter what happens today, don't become the kind of person he became." "I won't." The lobby was busier than I'd ever seen it. Shareholders, reporters, attorneys, employees, all filing toward the top-floor conference hall for what they believed would be another celebratory annual meeting. Carol found me first. "I've worked for your father 27 years, she said quietly. "I've never seen him this rattled." Rattled usually means he's losing control. I think he knows that now. At exactly 9 o'clock, my father walked onto the stage in front of nearly 200 people, looking every bit the picture of confidence, perfect suit, perfect smile. He thanked everyone for another record year, walked through impressive-looking slides, and then, 15 minutes in, he paused. "I'd like to address certain rumors that have been circulating," he said, one hand pressed to his chest. "I've spent 40 years building this company, and I won't let personal family disagreements distract from our mission. There are people who confuse bitterness with integrity." He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Every head in that room knew exactly who he meant. Before he could continue, the double doors at the back of the hall opened. Agent Reyes walked in, flanked by an assistant U.S. attorney and the company's former chief financial officer, carrying two heavy banker's boxes. Every conversation in the room died at once. "What is this?" my father demanded. The CFO didn't answer him. He walked straight to the board table instead. "I need to make a statement." The chairman, visibly confused, nodded. "You have the floor." The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. "For 11 years, the CFO began, his voice shaking, "I helped conceal fraudulent financial transfers. I told myself I was protecting this company." He looked out at the shareholders. "I was actually protecting one man." He turned to face my father directly. "I'm done doing that." "This is ridiculous," my father snapped. "No," the CFO said, opening the first box. "This is accounting." He laid out wire transfers, invoices, signed approvals, one after another, as the projector screen filled with spreadsheet after spreadsheet, millions of dollars routed through companies that existed only on paper. Directors began whispering. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. Agent Reyes stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, we have federal search warrants for company records and executive offices." My father actually laughed. "This is political." "No, sir," Reyes said evenly. "It's business." Then Colonel Hayes stepped in, carrying a small digital recorder, and connected it to the room's sound system. My father's eyes went wide. "No." His own voice filled the hall. "If the inspectors ask questions, delay them." "That's risky." "No, getting caught is risky." No editing, no dramatics, just his own words playing back to 200 witnesses. The room seemed to physically shrink around him. One board member quietly removed his company pin and set it on the table. Nobody defended him. Nobody said a word in his favor. "You're all making a mistake," he said desperately, looking around the room for a single ally. He found none. He pointed at me. "She planned this." I finally stood. "No, you did. You're my daughter, you owe me loyalty." I let that sit in the silence for a moment before answering. "I owed you honesty. I gave you that for years. You asked for obedience instead." He took a step toward me. "I built everything you have." I touched the eagle pinned at my collar. "No, Dad, I built this." The chairman rose slowly, his voice sounding older than it had an hour before. "Gerald, the board has reached a unanimous decision." He unfolded a prepared statement. "You are removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." My father looked from face to face around that table, arching for one ally, one friend, one person willing to stand up for him. There wasn't a single one. Power built on fear almost always ends up standing alone. Federal agents approached quietly, no handcuffs, no theatrics, just professionalism. "Mr. Whitmore, we need you to come with us." For the first time in my life, my father looked small. He glanced toward me, not angry, not proud, just tired. "I never thought," he started, then stopped, and finished almost in a whisper, "you'd end up stronger than me." I walked close enough that only he could hear me. "I never wanted to be stronger than you. I only ever wanted you to be my father." His eyes filled for just a moment before the agents led him out of the room. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Justice isn't entertainment. It carries too much weight for that. As the doors closed behind him, every eye in that room turned, not to me, but to the empty chair where Gerald Whitmore had sat for nearly 3 decades. Sometimes the loudest moment of a person's life arrives in complete silence. 6 months later, I drove that same stretch of interstate again, except this time I wasn't racing toward a crisis. Windows down, country radio playing low, I noticed things I'd been too consumed to see for months: green fields rolling past, roadside fruit stands, families pulling over for barbecue on a Saturday afternoon. Life had quietly started moving forward again. So had mine. Whitmore Construction still existed, though there had been plenty of days I wasn't sure it would survive. After my father's arrest, several projects were frozen while investigators sorted through the wreckage of the company's finances. Hundreds of employees feared losing their jobs: estimators, electricians, project managers, receptionists, people who had simply shown up and done honest work every single day. Their fear weighed on me more than my father's downfall ever had. The newly appointed board moved quickly, bringing in an outside CEO with no ties to my father, hiring independent auditors, and issuing a public apology to clients and shareholders. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it was a start. Several stalled veterans' housing projects were finally completed, and watching families receive keys to their new homes gave me more satisfaction than my father's sentencing ever did. Justice mattered. Helping the people who'd been hurt by all of it mattered even more. My mother had settled into her little apartment. Small kitchen, cozy living room, a narrow balcony overlooking the courtyard where kids still rode their bikes every evening. She joined the church choir, started volunteering at the county food pantry twice a week, and adopted an aging rescue dog named Maggie who followed her everywhere she went. "I spent so many years taking care of everyone else," she told me one afternoon, scratching Maggie behind the ears. "I almost forgot what peace feels like." "You deserve every bit of it," I told her. She looked at me carefully. "So do you." Back on post, life fell back into its familiar rhythm. One afternoon, a newly commissioned lieutenant knocked on my office door. "Ma'am, do you have a minute?" "Of course." He looked nervous. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. My father says I should have gone into business." I almost smiled. Parents aren't always right. I leaned back in my chair. What matters isn't whether everyone else understands your choices, it's whether you can look at yourself in the mirror every morning. He nodded slowly. "I think I can." "Then you're already ahead of a lot of people." As he left, I realized I hadn't been thinking about my own father while I said it. I'd simply been telling him the truth. A month after that, I received permission to visit the federal facility where my father was serving his sentence. People asked why I'd want to go. Some assumed I wanted closure, others assumed I wanted one last chance to win. Neither was quite right. I just wanted honesty, maybe for the first time in our lives. The visitation room was quiet, plastic chairs, a humming vending machine, families murmuring across metal tables. When my father walked in, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, along with the confidence that used to fill up every room he ever walked into. He looked older, smaller, more like the man he might have been if he hadn't spent decades pretending to be larger than everyone around him. He sat across from me, and for almost a full minute neither of us said a word. Finally, he broke the silence. "Your mother doing all right?" "She's happy." He nodded. "I'm glad." It sounded strangely like he meant it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No, it doesn't." He looked down at his hands resting on the table. "I spent my whole life believing success meant winning. I competed with everyone, my partners, my competitors, my own friends." He looked up at me. "Even my own daughter. I couldn't stand the idea that you found purpose somewhere I couldn't control. I kept waiting for you to fail." His voice cracked. "You never did." For years I had imagined this exact conversation, certain that hearing those words would finally heal something in me. Instead, I just felt sad. Not angry, not victorious. Just sad because the little girl who once desperately wanted her father's approval had grown up a long time ago, and she wasn't coming back for this. "I forgive you," I told him. His eyes filled with tears. "But forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility," I added, "and it doesn't erase the past." "I know," he said. "I just won't carry it anymore." He nodded slowly. "I wouldn't ask you to." When the guard announced visiting hours were over, he stood. "So this is goodbye." "No," I said gently. "It's just where our lives go in different directions." For the first time I could remember, he smiled at me without trying to win anything at all. Driving home that afternoon, I thought about everything that had happened since that phone call at 2:47 in the morning. I used to believe revenge meant making someone suffer as much as they'd made you suffer. I was wrong about that. Real justice isn't about creating more pain, it's about refusing to let lies keep hurting innocent people. If I had stayed silent, my father might have kept his company, but countless families would have kept paying the price for it. Telling the truth cost all of us something. It also gave every one of us a chance to finally rebuild. Today my mother laughs far more than she cries. The company employs honest people under honest leadership. And every single morning, When I button up my uniform, I no longer wonder whether my father is proud of me. I've learned that self-respect outlasts approval that never comes. If you've ever spent years trying to earn love from someone who kept moving the finish line further away, I hope you'll hold on to this. Your worth was never determined by another person's inability to see it. Sometimes the bravest choice isn't getting even. It's choosing integrity when silence would have been so much easier. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and if you'd like more stories like this one, I hope you'll come back and join me again soon. Until next time, take good care of yourself and of the people who truly earn a place in your life.